So your blood vessels. I realize that it's time for you to kind of change the way maybe you look at things a little bit. Like blood vessels are not just pipes. There are a whole bunch of individual cells packed tightly together that create the border, and there's space in between those cells, in the middle of all those cells that create the lumen, create the pipe. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So three-dimensionally, we have these cells that are all packed end to end, tight together. This cell packed next to this cell, and a whole bunch of them all down the line that create a thoroughfare for blood, and blood can't get out between those cells. Those cells hold the blood inside. Does that make sense? But not always, right? Because sometimes we have swelling, and sometimes the blood does get out. So those cells can get intracellular clefts in them that let the blood come in and out. That's possible. But the blood vessels are lined with these cells. What are those cells called?
Epithelial.
What are they called? That's right. Those are our
EP1.
endothelial cells. Endothelial cells. Outside those endothelial cells, we have more cells on our blood vessel that create the smooth muscle that surrounds it. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So we have endothelial cells that create the actual lining, and when we get down to our capillaries, we only have endothelial cells. We don't have muscle around capillaries. So capillaries don't have the ability to actively contract and dilate like the rest of our arterioles and veins do. Venules and veins, arterioles, arteries, veins, venules. The capillaries can't do that because they're only a line of endothelial cells, which makes it really easy for fluid to get in and out of them, right? Because they only have to go through the endothelial cell, right? Fluid only has to get out of the endothelial cell. It doesn't have to also pass through muscle. So we have very little leaking of blood vessels where we have muscles, and we have a whole lot of leaking of blood vessels where we have capillaries. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the active growth of our blood vessels, the compliancy of our blood vessels, the ability for them to get bigger and smaller, happens where we have smooth muscle. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, in the endothelial cell, those endothelial cells produce a gas. It's produced in the endothelial cell, and it's a gas called nitric oxide. Different than the nitrous oxide that is in your scope to give as a pain-relieving gas. Nitric oxide, although it has similar properties, it is also a gas. Nitric oxide is also a gas. So the endothelial cell produces a gas called nitric oxide. And that gas then will move from the endothelial cell into the smooth muscle cell. When it moves into the smooth muscle cell, so this is now the muscle cell, smooth muscle. When nitric oxide moves into the smooth muscle cell, and now you can not necessarily know everything that I'm going to talk about for just a minute. The nitric oxide is going to activate a protein that's there, that's called guanylene cyclase, that is going to lead to the production of what we call cyclic GMP. And in your AMP, you probably learned about cyclic AMP. It's the same thing. Adenosine monophosphate and guanine monophosphate have the same effect in the body. It's just a different amino acid that's putting it together in this particular case. The cyclic GMP, through a series of things, this is, by the way, called a second messenger. So when I talked about muscarinic receptors activating a G protein coupled receptor, it leads to a second messenger. There's a second chemical that causes something to happen. In the case of nitric oxide, I don't know why I put that talked up right against the word smooth, but In the case of nitric oxide, it's going to produce or going to activate this cyclic GMP. That cyclic GMP's results in this smooth muscle is that it is going to increase the activity of the calcium ATPase pump found on the SR. It's going to increase the activity of the calcium ATPase pump on the SR within that smooth muscle. And what is that calcium pump doing?
Pulling calcium away from
It's
into the SR.
putting calcium back into the SR.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's taking calcium and more actively pumping it back in. When you pump that calcium back in, what's going to happen to the muscle?
It's going to have less calcium.
It's going to have less calcium in it, which is going to do what?
Negative.
It's going to cause it to relax. It's going to cover the G-actin that's not going to allow the myosin head to then have access to it, and the net result is that we have relaxation because we no longer have the ability for that to contract because that site's not available for the myosin head. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So nitric oxide is the body, when I say our, I mean the body's most potent vasodilator. It is the body's most potent vasodilator. Nitroglycerin is nitric oxide. It's not. But when you give nitroglycerin, it increases nitric oxide in the body. Not just the production of nitric oxide, but nitroglycerin itself will become nitric oxide in the body. And so when we give nitro, we are increasing the nitric oxide on the body in huge quantities, and we get massive vasodilation, which is the goal of nitro. Yes?
Yes.
Any questions with that?
No.
Okay. There is an enzyme called phosphodiesterase. And phosphodiesterase inactivates cyclic GMP. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, when we give nitro, it's system-wide. Yeah, our goal is obviously to have cardiac function dilated, but you see it everywhere, which is why they also tend to get headaches. And we see it everywhere. Now, in a healthy individual, I should be able to give everybody in here a shot of nitro, and it shouldn't lower your blood pressure. And it shouldn't lower your blood pressure because all of us have a reflex to prevent that. You know what it's called?
Barrel
reflex.
Yeah, we all have the barrel reflex, which is gonna counter systemically that drop in blood pressure, okay? Or systemically that vasodilation that's occurring. That being said, and some people are, it's not functional, which we'll talk about later when we talk about right-sided failures in people's hearts. But the phosphodiesterase inactivates cyclic GMP. Anyone know what Viagra is? Which is getting to the heart of the question, because the question was asked, why do sexual enhancement drugs and nitro have a problem with each other? Anyone know what?
Vasoconstrictor.
Nitrate.
Also a nitrate,
Let's say again.
nitrate,
No? What is it? Anyone know what the mechanism of action of Viagra is?
Block phosphodiesterase?
Yes, it's what's called a phosphodiesterase inhibitor. And so what Viagra does, and other sexual enhancement drugs, they wipe out this enzyme. The ability of that enzyme to do its job. If that enzyme is wiped out, then what is the net result?
More
More
nitrous
GPM,
oxide. More GPs.
The cyclic GMP is left unchecked. Now, in somebody who wants sexual enhancement, the whole point of using a phosphodiesterase inhibitor is that the net result of giving a phosphodiesterase inhibitor is that you have more cyclic GMP, and therefore you have more vasodilation. Erections happen because of vasodilation, so therefore you have more blood engorgement, and therefore it takes care of the problem. But if you have a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, which is the stopping of cyclic GMP, and the way that this enzyme, the way that our body generally works, y'all learned in A and P about positive feedback, yes?
Mm-hmm,
Feedback loops
mm-hmm,
and negative feedback loops, right?
yes.
What's a positive feedback loop?
So it just keeps going.
That would be
What
what would
increases?
happen if you took.
It's,
So.
Positive,
labor is a positive
Like
feedback.
cortisol.
Cortisol
The
release is an
presence of
example.
cortisol increases the activation or the release of more cortisol, so it just keeps piling up on each other.
Okay. What did you say?
I said labor because,
Yep. Labor is an example. Anyone have another example? Blood clotting is an example. Within reason. What, anything else? Shock is an example. Here's the deal. Positive feedback loops mean that if you have substance or action A. I don't care what it is. You either have a substance, you're getting a substance, or you're causing an action of some sort in the body. A leads to B leads to C leads to D, and D leads back to A. So if we had an increase in A, if we started with an increase in A, that would lead to something with B, something with C, and something with D. And when D happens, we end with an increase in A. So we're increasing A after D, but we started with an increase in A. Does that make sense? Which puts us back into this loop, which gets us back to D again, which will increase A again. And we just keep increasing A the whole time. So you can argue that the blood clotting cascade is exactly this until we get down to the clot. Labor is this until when?
Baby.
Until the baby comes out, right? Okay. So positive feedback loops are that way. What's a negative feedback loop then?
The opposite?
What is the negative feedback
Where
loop?
an increase in D causes an inhibition.
the barrel reflex.
Okay.
There you go. A negative, so if this were a positive, we started with, and I'll do it this way. Right? We start with A, an increase in A, we end with an increase in A. That's a positive feedback loop. A negative feedback loop then would be we start with an increase in A, which leads us to D, which leads us to a decrease in A. That would be a negative feedback loop. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All positive feedback loops in our body are relegated within a negative feedback loop. Every single one of them. They have to, including clotting, right? The positive feedback loop is the clotting process, but you get to a clot, which then breaks down the clot. Because if we only had a positive feedback loop in the relationship of clotting, then what would we be?
A
big
big fat
clot.
clot.
We'd be a big walking clot. Same thing with labor. You have a positive feedback loop all the way down until when?
Baby's delivered.
If you plugged the hole and didn't let the baby come out, we would just continue that positive feedback loop until mom's dead. All positive feedback loops that are left outside of a negative feedback loop are going to kill you. Every one of them. You can't continue increasing something for indefinitely, forever. You have to at some point in time decrease it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so in the context of this, as we start increasing high levels of cyclic GMP, your body will then counter that by producing more phosphodiesterase to then decrease the levels of cyclic GMP. Does that make sense? So Viagra works by getting rid of that phosphodiesterase, by inhibiting that phosphodiesterase, and therefore whatever cyclic GMP is there is left unchecked. Does that make sense? But our body still has checks and balances globally that it can handle. For example, as we start to have high levels of cyclic GMP, it'll start reducing the production of nitric oxide. We'll have a backfeed that will stop producing the effects of nitric oxide, and we're left with a certain amount of vasodilation for a period of time. You have an erection for a window of time. Does that make sense? But if we have a phosphodiesterase inhibitor on board, and we provide nitroglycerin, now we have unchecked production of nitric oxide and unchecked negative feedback loop possibilities. We cannot We have no negative feedback to that nitric oxide that we are producing. It produces massive amounts of cyclic GMP, and as that cyclic GMP starts to increase, there is no feedback to create more of the enzyme to check it. So we've gotten rid of the thing that counters the cyclic GMP, and we've added the thing that only produces it. And so we have unchecked vasodilation that our barrel reflux can't cover, can't count
Is
for.
what to say, when you're just blood pressure tank beyond.
Correct, because there's no way that the heart can go fast enough and push enough cardiac output, because we're losing cardiac output, because this is happening on the veins as well as the arteries. So it's happening on both sides, because nitric oxide is affecting all smooth muscle. So therefore, we have unchecked drop-in fluid and nothing to counter it with our negative feedback. And so what we get is, for a window of time, nothing but massive amounts of nitric oxide and nothing to try to counter that.
Is there any way, like, medically we can do anything about it? Like, if someone, like,
Yeah,
took
we'll give
ED
vasopressors.
drugs.
We'd have to give vasopressors, like dopamine or epinephrine or something that tries to, because those work on different receptors to try to cause the constriction.
Just don't give nitrogen.
I'm saying if they took that
Honestly.
and also took an ED drug, I guess that's why they don't prescription for both.
So when we talk clinical priapism, it's not quite the same. So yes, priapism is an erection, but you wouldn't say that because you have a sexually enhanced erection, you have priapism. Priapism is a clinical manifestation of loss of control of our blood vessels that happens when we have loss of control of our spinal cord.
Isn't it more specific to Atlas and Axis?
For priapism?
Yeah.
What's a priapism?
Is this any
Boner.
spinal cord?
No, you have to be above the site that
Say it as you
controls,
put
that
that
have
scenario.
the spinal nerves that go
You say ho ho ho?
to those
Whoa,
blood
whoa, wait.
vessels. And the higher up it is, the higher it is.
I would hope there's some shorts that
Oh, those are new shirts?
But you don't need we don't have we need the size and shirt.
Correct.